and this is in the voice of Jeff Brubeck, the main character. Mondays and Tuesdays had become my favorite days of the week because it was on those days that I did most of my collections. At the beginning of each week, I collected money from the merchants at each of the stores that carried the newspapers. The merchants would give me the newspapers that they were unable to sell from the prior week, and they would pay me for the newspapers that they had sold. Some merchants paid me with checks, and some paid me with cash right out of the cash register. In addition to collecting the money, this was also a time for me to say hello and do a little schmoozing with each of the merchants. I always made it a point to thank them and to tell them how much I appreciated the fact that they sold my newspapers in their stores. When I began my first delivery route a couple years earlier, I was surprised at how important that little bit of courtesy and professionalism was to the store owners. It seemed obvious to me that they were not accustomed to hearing thank you from a supplier, and they were certainly not expecting to hear it from a representative of the Oakland Tribune. They were an eclectic group, these small entrepreneurs, many of them recent arrivals to the United States. After they got to know me, we would talk about their families, their businesses, local politics, and a subject that endlessly fascinated them, my love life. They could not fathom why I was not married and why I didn't have a passel of children. One kindly old Indian convenience store owner even offered to find me a suitable Indian bride fresh from Mumbai. He assured me that she would be a perfect wife. She will be a good cook, he said, listing her attributes. She will be very quiet, and she will give you many children. This part of the city of Oakland is made up of small retail businesses run by people who could have formed a mini United Nations. The 7-Eleven convenience stores were mostly owned by East Indians. The liquor stores were often owned by Arab Muslims, which surprised me, since they usually took such a dim view of alcohol. Small grocery stores with lots of fresh produce were usually Korean-owned. Manicure salons were mostly Vietnamese. Donut shops were owned by Cambodians. Coffee shops were usually owned by Anglos, the term given to non-Latino whites, and restaurants could be owned by anybody. This particular morning, I quickly collected from as many of the merchants along MacArthur Boulevard as I could. Shortly after noon, I turned my truck onto the freeway and headed for the Grand Lake District, just east of beautiful Lake Merritt. The Grand Lake District is one of those neighborhoods in Oakland that surprises visitors from other parts of the Bay Area. Many of those visitors, especially those living on the left shore of the bay, have been conditioned by the San Francisco media, which constantly runs stories about Oakland's ghettos and crimes and drugs. You would think that nothing else went on in the East Bay. Many who visit the Grand Lake District are surprised to find a comfortable middle to upper middle class area with some great houses and fine apartment buildings on pretty tree-lined streets and a small retail section with trendy coffee shops, an excellent bookstore, and some good restaurants. It is the kind of attractive, prosperous neighborhood that can be found in many cities all over the country. But there are two things that make Oakland's Grand Lake District different from the comparable neighborhoods in other American cities. The first thing is the ethnic diversity that reflects Oakland's population. Blacks, whites, Asians, Arabs, Persians, and Latinos, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, you name it, they are all here. And they are all enjoying varying degrees of success in their lives. And for the most part, they all get along. The second thing that makes the Grand Lake District unique is the stunning Grand Lake Theater. This magnificent old movie palace simply dominates the neighborhood. Built in the 1920s The Grand Lake Theater is part of the old chain of Fox theaters that was developed around the country during the early years of the movie industry, when movies were still silent pictures. Some of those theaters are really magnificent structures, and very few of them still survive. Oakland's Grand Lake Theater is one of the rare treasures that still stands, and it still shows first-run movies. As I drove by, I noticed that one of the movies listed on the marquee today was called Silence of the Lambs. What a strange name, I thought. I wonder what that's about.